In this video, I will continue the discussion of the waste management history and focus this time on the relevant key events that took place in the USA up until the late 20th century. The USA is actually the later replication of the UK in terms of population growth and industrial diversity. The rise in the numbers of immigrants from Europe during the 17th century and later from other continents caused an urban and industrial boom, which was accompanied, as usual, by similar challenges to those previously faced in the UK in terms of waste generation and accumulation. The main factors that make USA waste management history a model to consider when analyzing the development of waste management during the first evolutionary phase are the following. Number one, the consumption rate of goods in the USA has always been unprecedented. Thus, the problem of waste generation was much larger than in any other country in the world. Two, the growth of urbanization in the United States has been so rapid that large metropolitan areas have sprung up relatively quickly and have pushed the problem of waste accumulation to the fore. Before I even begin, I would like to share an interesting fact with you. So the archaeological studies revealed that Native Americans in Colorado were generating garbage as early as 6,500 BC, producing an average of 5.3 pounds of waste per day back then. And now, go back to the historical discourse. The first documented record of organized waste management activity in the USA dated back to 1690, when the first paper recycling process was established and paper was made from rags back then instead of wood pulp. Obviously, and unfortunately, the USA ignored the waste issue for the first 200 years, being founded as a republic. It seems that the excessive land space and rivers that served as waste disposal locations were the reasons why. It is believed that Benjamin Franklin was the first American waste management system designer when the first organized collection system was created, and heavy fines up to 30 shillings against those who dump waste in public areas was imposed back in 1731. This event marked the first recorded polluter pays system in history. Having this said, we need to note that for the next 170 years or so, waterways were the method of choice for disposing all the solid wastes that were generated in the USA. A good example is Philadelphia's 60,000 inhabitants waste that was dumped into the Delaware River. As we can see, the main focus of the US government back then was to simply remove waste from site, with very little regard for the destination or the disposal method of waste. In 1852, Francis Wall invented the paper bag making machine in the United States, leading to a shift in the composition of waste and an increase in the packaging waste found in the waste bins and disposal sites. An interesting fact to note about waste logistics during 1880s is that nearly 80% of Manhattan's waste was transported by horses and dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. At this time, there was no funding available for a regional waste management infrastructure. So the idea of centralizing waste management was not even considered at the federal level. As a result, local authorities were left to find their own solutions of this growing challenge. The modern waste management practice in the USA, rooted in the practices introduced by George Waring at the New York City Sanitation Department from 1895 to 1898. He was the first to introduce the unit operations approach involving controls of waste generation and collection programs, transportation, processing, which includes recycling, incineration with or without energy recovery, and landfilling, to the practices of what was called refuse management back then. The New York City Street Cleaning Commissioner demonstrated leadership in imposing the first program to collect waste glass separately back in 1896, which marked the first separate collection initiative in the USA waste management history. But during this period, another challenge emerged. Dump sites became the second waste disposal option of choice and grew rapidly. To give you an idea how severe this issue became, just picture this. By 1900, landfill already occupied a 27.3 square kilometer cluster near the early urban center in southern New York City. Unlike British, the Americans had remained hesitant about adopting waste burning technology for a long time due to early disappointments with badly engineered systems and the skepticism of the technology as wasteful of useful resources. The first thermal destructor in the United States was built in 1885 on Governor's Island in New York. In 1913, several projects were underway to generate steam and electrical power through the incineration process. This technology was implemented in several cities and managed to impress the authorities to such a degree that the USA had more destructors deployed than any other place on Earth within 15 years. This period also saw the first categorization of waste into residential, commercial, and industrial categories. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, issued a set of legislations between 1953 and 1973, primarily to regulate air and water pollution. And as a result, the two most popular waste disposal methods, incineration and ocean dumping, were greatly affected. Incineration technology managed to survive until the 1960s, when the Clean Air Act, that was part of EPA legislation's package, forced many polluting incinerators to close by 1963. However, innovative economic initiatives back then began to emerge, aiming to capture the recyclables before they were mixed with waste. For example, Olympia, Washington started paying for returned aluminum cans in 1954 to emphasize the importance of this new approach. The waste accumulation crisis pushed Congress to enact the first federal legislation specifically addressing municipal solid waste management in 1965. The Solid Waste Disposal Act was the first federal organizational arrangement of its kind in the history of waste management in the USA. According to this act, local authorities were required to adhere to two simple rules. First, they had to develop statewide municipal solid waste management plans, and second, they had to design designate a single state agency to implement these plans. The Resource Recovery Act in 1970, RRA, marked a significant shift in waste management practices, as it was the first indication for a move towards from waste management to resources management. In response to this act, Vermont passed a bottle bill in 1971 that banned non-refillable bottles. However, this law was short-lived, lasting only 4 years due to the lobbying efforts from the beer industry. In the same year, Oregon implemented the first bottle bill that required a deposit, and Coca-Cola was also pressured into offering a 5-cent deposit program. The economic growth of large cities in the 70s attracted large labor force and skilled specialists, resulting in approximately 74% of the US population back then living in urban areas by 1973. This rapid urbanization led to doubling the volume of waste generated between 1953 and 1973. And approximately 90% of this waste during this period was disposed of in the dump sites. By 1978, many cities, including Jersey City, New Jersey, Kansas City, Missouri, and Boston, Massachusetts, had already reached their landfill capacity, with many projected to do so. And by 1980, there were 227,187 disposal sites in the USA, and only 7% of them were specialized engineered landfills.